professional world are certainly now paying more attention than they had before. We're dealing a lot more with Bloomberg messages than we ever had before, because a lot of that is becoming discoverable. Okay, so certainly anybody who's regulated by the SEC is paying a lot more attention now than they were before. Anybody who markets or manufactures consumer goods on a mass scale, their marketing practices are being looked at, their manufacturing practices are being looked at. So anybody who has to answer to somebody else is probably paying a lot more attention today than they were 5 to 10 years ago. But certainly it varies from business to business, or even varies within a business to who's running that office. Right? Technology and systems are only as successful as the people who use them. Okay? Businesses are comprised of people, and very often we find that as we move up the chain, some of the higher level executives don't adhere to any system. Right? They do what they want. They've got multiple laptops. Everybody's got a BlackBerry, or this guy's got 2 iPhones. Right? So it really varies. And in summing it up, a big factor that drives our search methods and our practices is just the deadline, the availability of the resources in the target enterprise. Is IT available? Are they between IT groups? Is the person on vacation?
Yeah, actually, a very good question. Talking about the legal ramifications of failing to, like, for companies that use a lot of proprietary databases for their data,
Sure.
and supposedly incriminating evidence or whatever evidence is in those proprietary databases, what are the legal ramifications for companies saying they don't have the resources to be able to provide that?
Well, as far as the question is, what happens when there's an organization that maybe uses a highly proprietary database to run their business, and they say that they really can't get at the data that somebody else is asking for? I'm not an attorney, so to speak to the nuances of the legal issue there, I don't have an opinion on, but I can tell you in logistically dealing with that problem, what very often happens is the side that has the database says, it'll take us, our primary function is to do business. In order for us to get at this data, it's potentially going to take us X amount of days, X amount of time with this staff. We're diverting resources which are normally driven towards creating revenue, and they make that argument. It's the burden, right? We're talking about the burden of getting access to the data. And their legal team will make that argument, and the judge will decide if that's true or not, and try to make some assessment.
But it happens outside your purview.
Yes, it does. It does. That's part of the legal process. Yes, sir.
And during the years that we were transitioning from business records that were primarily on paper to those that were primarily electronic, in most litigation, the parties would stipulate as to the authenticity of the data and argue about what it meant. Is that still happening, or are we having litigation now over the authenticity of the records?
The question is, when business was primarily driven with paper records, there often existed the issue of the authenticity of a paper document. Right? There's a discussion about, well, is this the actual document? Is this a copy, an accurate copy? And does that continue to happen today as we're dealing with data? And the answer is yes. And we're really dealing with the nuances of metadata at that point, right? People can contend that file has been altered, the same way they can contend that someone made a copy and put another piece of paper over the copy and altered the way that document looked. So if someone is inclined to change a document, they could probably do it now more easily than they did when everything was paper, right? And the forensic collection effort and the analysis and investigation of the document, or even the file system where the document lived, was it deleted, things like that, they all come into play. But as far as where we participate, we participated in that a number of times, but in civil litigation, with the volume of data, we don't see the authenticity of documents called into question very often, I should say. It really comes down to a particular document or two that are of very high level importance, if there is some question there. Because the volume of data that we see in an enterprise is just enormous. So people are more worried about what's on the document And if it gets to the point where there's some doubt about what's on the document, then they start talking about, oh, is this the correct version? Did you change it? Things like that. But most often, the biggest problem is just the volume. In the end, unstructured data search, it's a complex topic. It's a tough question to answer, but we have to begin with the end in mind, right? If we know what the desired result is, regardless of what the situation throws at us, we can try to map out a plan and drive out that plan. As long as we document it and we can repeat the plan fast, that's kind of all we're asked to do at this point, and that's what we try to achieve. And that's really our goal. Like I said, begin with the end in mind, consider the overall scope. What's the burden threshold? This gentleman asked about the proprietary database. As I said before, if it's an issue that someone was willing to settle for $1 million, but they probably have to spend $800,000 to potentially litigate it, you're probably not going to want to do $200,000 international collection, right? So that's a big question too. So just be sure to assess and understand the issue specific to the required search, create and execute, and constantly adjust a plan in real time. This is an iterative process. It's not linear. We're constantly going back to different phases of the EDRM life cycle, and just be aware of the possible variables. Yes?
Your index engines, does it have the capability to determine if a criminal hacker enters an environment that's unencrypted? Does the engine capture them sending information out encrypted?
The question's about index engines, right? Index engines is another organization. It's a technology that's primarily designed to index and search archive data. That process will not speak to if the data was used in any malicious way. It won't speak to whether the data left the organization or how it came into the organization. Okay? There are other applications and methods you can certainly use for those types of investigations.
Any other questions? Oh, come on. This is my full Donahue chance here. Okay. Hold on. I have a question for the speaker. You ever come across in attachments as keys, like data encryption or decryption keys, and you don't know where they go?
The question. Not often. Again, anything that tends to slow down business is typically frowned upon. If there are people in a business group or a corporation who deal with highly sensitive data, they have typically some protocol in place that dictates the way that they communicate amongst themselves and within that unit, who they can communicate that information to. And if that was the case within a company, we would engage that business group, and they would give us the information, preferably in a way that does not occur. But that may happen. It doesn't happen often. And very often, if that does happen, that information that has been encrypted as in that email will live on a file share in some other password-protected container that hopefully someone has a password for. But we do come across it, but it's not something that we encounter very regularly.
Anybody else? Hold on.
How do you know if they're withholding data from you?
Yeah, it's a great question. In this process, it's kind of a, I went through Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, kind of in good faith, do certain things, right? There really is not a way to know. Unless, as the gentleman mentioned before, you communicated with the party that you're at odds with about a particular issue, and you've decided to delete certain emails that you no longer like, but they have, then you can contend that you deleted them, or why can I produce them but you can't, right? Production goes both ways when people are at odds with one another. It's not usually just one way. But without an investigation and without someone even contending that that's happening, it's just kind of a best faith effort type of thing. It's part of the law, right? It's you have to adhere to the law.
Okay.
And Robles, just to put a PS on the last comment, you want to look up Sunbeam, Morgan Stanley, et al. The failure to produce backup tapes on a pretext, which later turned out to be hollow, produced, I forget the exact number, but I believe it was well north of $500 million directed verdict against. Now, the verdict was overturned on appeal on an unrelated issue higher up in the decision tree. But the bottom line that I tell clients is, do you want to throw craps? You don't want to end up with an email missing that somebody else has a copy of and produces as proof of bad faith.
Yeah. And to add to that point, technology today has gotten sophisticated enough where if we analyze email strings, it will tell us that there's an email missing in that string, and will presume, based on the string, what that email actually comprised of. Right? It'll build the tree, and you'll have a red empty box there. And when you click on the box, it actually shows you this is probably what that email had in it. But certainly, based on the metadata, there is a meshes that exists between these two, but you don't have it.